Photoshop has now evolved to the point that serious attention has to be given to your computer's technical standards in order to get the most out of it. Specifically, the Mercury graphics engine now takes advantage of your graphic card's CPU to accelerate performance. Ergo, it stands to reason that if you're considering a new machine or an upgrade, you should plan for the most sophisticated graphics card you can afford. In addition, get the most RAM your machine can accommodate. Now, I operate Photoshop from a MacBook Pro, and when I went from 4 gigs to 16 gigs of RAM, Photoshop was simply laying rubber. Now I know the technical specifications for the MacBook Pro say that the maximum amount of RAM is 8, but trust me when I tell you that's not true. It will take 16 gigs of RAM. Now if you're running a PC, let me suggest a few things that'll make life so much easier. First and foremost, run only Windows 7 64-bit, and specifically not Windows Vista. Of course, this is not a lesson on operating systems, but trust me, Windows 7 will treat Photoshop much better than Vista. There are innumerable other reasons to dump Vista with which you are probably already familiar, but in terms of Photoshop performance, Windows 7 64-bit is the best. And you certainly can believe that when you come to the system requirements on the CS6 technical specifications page and see that indeed Vista is not listed as one of the options for system requirements. Now for Mac users, you don't have as much configuration options as PC users, but for the Mac Pro and the iMac, go big where you can. You can get graphics cards from the major manufacturers that will upgrade a stock graphics card on those models. The MacBook Pro has no graphics card upgrade available, so you have to use what you get. Now if you're going to use a Mac laptop, use only late model MacBook Pros, those made in the last 18 months or so, and fill them to the gunnels with RAM. Some models' manuals, as I said before, will tell you that the maximum is 8 gigs, but mine has 16, the system recognizes it, and Photoshop just screams. And whatever you do, don't use a MacBook Air for Photoshop work. It just doesn't have the innards to handle the workload Photoshop puts on a computer. Yes, they use flash storage, which is very fast, but the graphics card is way too lean to use with Photoshop. You'll wait forever waiting for your images to render. Now, let's lift the hood, take a look at what the actual settings you should use for both Macs and PCs. Now the first thing you should do is find Photoshop's Preferences manual, and of course on a PC it's located under Edit, all the way at the bottom under Preferences, and then you're going to click on Performance. And we're going to drop down to the Performance window, and there's 4 places that you need to give attention to. And right here, what I do, if you have at least 8 gigs of RAM, run this up to 70%. Let Photoshop use 70% of the RAM available in your machine, but only set it that way if you're running 8 gigs of RAM or more. At 4 gigs of RAM, that doesn't leave enough resources for the rest of your machine to function, so you're going to be left with the default setting, which is 59%. Now on scratch disks, I don't have an external hard drive listed here. If you have a partitioned internal hard drive, put it on your non-boot hard drive if you can. If you can't do it, it'll still work, but it does run faster when the scratch disk is designated as a non-bootable hard drive. As far as histories and cache are concerned, the history states is a function only of the history states in the layer palette. The cache levels, however, is a different matter. I would increase that all the way up to 8, and when you're working on an image, it will run much, much faster when cache levels are up at 8. Cache tile size, let that be default. Now here's where life gets interesting. On the graphics processor settings, noticed that the detected graphics processor is illuminated right here. And of course this is an older machine, so these are going to be probably graphics cards that aren't even made anymore. Check Use Graphics Processor. That enables the Mercury graphics engine to work and thus makes Photoshop CS6 really, really fly. Click on Advanced Settings and set this on the drawing mode of Advanced. Not Basic or Normal, but Advanced, at least to start with. If your machine can't handle it, then back down. But start at Advanced. You're going to use the graphics processor to accelerate computation. You're going to use the graphics processor to configure your anti-alias guides and paths, and also throw out a 30-bit display. Now notice here where it says use OpenCL. Now let's talk a little bit about OpenCL and what it means. Now OpenCL, or OpenGL, the terms are interchangeable, is a graphics API that facilitates developers of games and CAD 3D applications. And of course it facilitates the 3D functionality in Photoshop CS6. If you're not doing any or very little 3D work, OpenGL is not worth the hassle of configuration and updates. Plus, at least on my machine, when I turned this off, Photoshop ran much better. Now for 99% of you, turning off the OpenCL will help your performance if you're not using 3D or CAD applications. In fact, the standard calls for OpenCL version 2.0, but the OpenCL standards developers are using now is 4.2. So you can see there's a wide gap between what the program is going to be asking for and what the OpenCL can deliver between those two versions. Just ignore OpenCL and don't use it, again, unless you're doing a lot of 3D and CAD work. And there you have it, how to set up your computer. I know it's boring, and I know it's a topic as far away from adjusting images as you can get, but it's going to be very, very important when we get into Photoshop and you start doing some intensive work with the program.